Happy to be here today to talk about FS-ISAC, or the Financial Services Information Sharing and Analysis Center. I'm the president and CEO, but I do have bosses. That's my board. We're a nonprofit corporation, so it's the members that are actually my bosses. I have to go back and look at where we were a few years ago when I joined the organization in 2006 and where we are today. Talk a little bit about our global regional strategy, and specifically the Singapore Intelligence Center, and some of our partnerships that we've developed over the years. Another thing I wanted to talk about that we're members of is this Global Resilience Federation, which is really a multi-sector effort that actually we helped launch a few years ago and made it formal, actually a separate entity in May. I'd like to take questions, but I'm told we can't take any. But if you want to catch me afterwards, I'll be hanging around, so maybe we could hit me up for some questions later. This is our mission. It's really to share timely, relevant, actionable cyber and physical security information analysis. Now, I joined the organization in 2006. Unlike Rohan, who has actually a security background, I had a banking background. In fact, I used to be a lender. I got involved in treasury management. Then I got involved in payment systems. And somehow I got involved in this thing called FS-ISAC and cybersecurity in 2006. The first thing I noticed when I took the job was this information sharing that everybody talked about. There wasn't much of it going on. In fact, when a member shared some information, we literally threw a party. It was such a rare event. We started doing that. I joined the organization in 2006. I think it was in about 2008. Myself and another gentleman that also happens to be on my board, we were asked by the British, actually CP&I folks. This was an organization that was run by MI5 types, like secret agent types and security types for the British government. Asked us to meet them at the British Embassy in Washington, D.C. They wanted to talk to us about information sharing. They said, well, you've got a pretty interesting system, but you don't use the traffic light protocol. And we said, well, what's that? And they explained it to us. And I thought, light bulb went off. And I said, well, we need to adopt that. Because the way we were sharing, you weren't allowed, if you shared something within the FS-ISAC, anybody that received it really wasn't allowed to share it with anybody else, except people within their own organization. So with the traffic light protocol, you as the originator could determine how that information was shared across the network. So if it's TLP red, that's just between you and me. If it's amber, you can share it between other people within your organization. If it's green, you can share it with your managed security service provider, in some cases even customers. You just can't post it on a public website or give it to the press. And we even came up with something called white, which means you can share it with the press. So in some cases, we want to share everything, some of the stuff with the press. That really changed the landscape. Another thing that happened were there were two organizations that decided they were going to start sharing stuff. They assigned somebody within their company, their full-time job was starting to just share information. Before that, I used to get calls from members, and they'd say, geez, I had this thing happen to me last week, this incident or this attack. And I said, why didn't you share it? Oh, yeah, I forgot. So the culture wasn't there. And there actually were some financial institutions that said, well, this is a competitive issue. I've got better security than my competitor down the street or across the country, around the world. I'm not going to share because I don't want to, because I have a competitive advantage. I've got better security. Well, that attitude started to change when those two institutions started to share everything. And then everyone else saw the benefit of this community of sharing. So we're designed, we're developed, we're owned by financial services industry. It's a broad definition. It's banks, it's also broker-dealers, it's insurance companies and payment systems operators. It's also some FinTech companies that provide core operating services for financial institutions. In our cases, it's like third-party service providers that provide DDA or current account information, or they provide those systems. Those have to be protected. So we view them as part of the financial services industry, and they need to be part of it. The other thing that happened in 2012, we got an application. We're strictly a US-based organization. you had to have a US presence to be a member. Now, we had some members that were based outside the US, but they had a US presence, so they were eligible to join. But we got a payment processor in the UK asked to join. They did join. We allowed them to join. The board said, okay, let them in, but let's develop some criteria for allowing others to join so we don't have to approve these each time. So we did that in 2012. I started to make trips starting over in Europe. I got approached by some, I think, junior people from MAS, Monetary Authority of Singapore, in New York. They were based in New York. They came to me and they said, we would like to set up basically an FS-ISAC-like operating center here in Singapore. That started, I think, in about 2013, those discussions. It took a few years. It's up and running. We got it running actually this year. A few months ago, we hired an executive director who started about 7 business days ago. Kunal Sehgal just started. Very excited to have him on board, and we have an analyst team and some membership help already based here in Singapore. So we have 16 regional staff now in Europe, Canada, Japan, Singapore, Australia, and South America. Actually, that's with adding to South America, that'll be 17. Looking at how we've grown, we had 68 members in 2004 to 7,000 members today. That's like really steep growth if you look at that. If we were a for-profit business, we'd be worth a lot of money, but we're not. We're a nonprofit, so we take all the money that we get in and we put it back into services for the members and hiring people, better systems, and better technologies. What does FS-ISAC deliver to its members? Intelligence, analysis, crisis response and exercises, information sharing that I already talked about. We also put on summits and events. We put on an APAC summit here in Singapore every year. We also have workshops, and we've done some training and education here in Singapore too, and really around the world. The information sharing goes from member to member. It can go from government partners or other partners, technology partners that we might have. It's also a two-way street. I'm going to go back to an instance that happened in 2009. There was a massive data breach in the US. And I can talk about, we normally don't talk about members' data breaches, but this member is actually glad to let us talk about it. It's a company called Heartland Payment Systems. They had 120 million cards compromised. Their CEO called me up about a month after it happened, and he said, Bill, I hear you guys share information. We'd like to become members. I said, yeah, it's great. Why now? He said, well, I know that law enforcement knew that we had been breached, didn't tell us. I know that the US Department of Justice knew about it, didn't tell us. Now, why weren't they telling? They were collecting evidence so they could prosecute someone, but they didn't. In 2009, they weren't telling the victims about it. And I also knew that payment processors, he said other payment processors knew we had been breached and didn't tell us. So we formed a special group just for that payment processor group, really a circle of trust just for them to start sharing. And that CEO, his name is Bob Carr, became the first chairman of that group. It's interesting, 1 year after his breach, the stock price was the same as it was before the breach, and he didn't lose one customer. He actually opened his kimono, you might say, and told everybody what had happened. Told them all about the indicators, the indicators of compromise, told them about the tactics, techniques, procedures used, and started sharing rapidly, and talked about the steps they were taking to ensure it didn't happen again, to prevent or detect this from happening for others. And this was a new phenomenon where the CEO took responsibility. Now I look at other data breaches that have occurred. First person to get fired is the CISO, right? Chief Information Security Officer. Second person is CIO. And the last person is CEO. You got to be transparent when these things happen. You got to tell your customers in particular and the public what's happened, what you're doing to correct the problem. Don't give them a bunch of BS. Okay? Tell the truth. Step up and be honest. And that's what everybody appreciates, and those are the people that succeed. With this, there's some recent attacks. I think it was NotPetya. I think Maersk, the shipping company, was breached as a result of that, and they were down for, they said they lost maybe $300 million as a result of that. it was interesting. Their CEO did a similar thing. Their email system didn't work, by the way. So they put all the employees on a WhatsApp application, started communicating with them that way. He sent a message out and said, do whatever it takes to keep that customer happy. Don't come back to us, headquarters, for permission to do anything. We'll back you 100%, whatever it costs, to make that customer happy. That is CEOs taking responsibility, and that's how you respond to a major compromise. We've also developed a lot more reports in terms of intelligence reports. We have these things called spotlight reports on recent examples listed here. I think the biggest thing that we do is we do a regional watch update. It's a once-a-week type thing where we do one for APAC, one for the Americas, and one for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. Those weekly updates seem to be always different. It's always not the same attacks happening everywhere. Sometimes we see completely different attacks being reported by members in Asia than we might see in Europe. Sometimes they are the same, and we do report those too, of course. The other thing that happened a few years ago, I won't say which CEO it was, but a major CEO from a major New York bank had asked one of his employees that was the CISO of that bank, I want to know more about the FS-ISAC. So I was working at my home office that day, 7:30 at night, I get this call from my chairman at the time, from that bank, the CISO, and he said, Bill, I need something for my CEO, all about the FS-ISAC. So I sent him a deck, sent him some stuff. The next day I heard back from him. He said, CEO loved it. We need to do more CEO outreach. We were not in touch with CEOs. So happened there was another person from another trade association that came to see me the next week. He said the same thing to me. He said, Bill, you do a great job, but you don't do a very good job with CEOs. And this guy offered to help me because he worked with CEOs in his job. And I said, okay, you're hired because my boss wants this. So we hired him to do this. And basically, it's a monthly executive summary we do. It's a brief for CEOs. I'm saying we dumb it down for CEOs, but we kind of dumb it down for them. Here's the essentials that you need to know about the latest cybersecurity issues that may affect your company. We label TLP green, can be shared with employees, trusted partners, communicates the latest threat landscape trends using non-technical language, and promotes a proactive approach to cybersecurity. Lately, we've also been producing some new reports the last couple of weeks, technical analysis reports. These are very, very technical. We're producing one of about 4 to 5 a week on latest attacks, complete detail for your real technical geeks on your staff. This stuff's great. In fact, it's become their biggest hit, I think, some of the new intelligence that we're producing. What is our regional strategy in the Americas? Well, we have a threat intel committee. We have a business resilience committee working mostly on response to physical type events. We get a lot of hurricanes in the US. We also know about terrorist attacks that have happened, other things. Many activities occurring in Canada, the US, and Brazil. Latin America is still in development. In Europe, the Middle East, and Africa, we have their own threat intelligence committee. We have a strategy committee there, a business resilience committee, similar to what we have at APAC, a threat intel committee, APAC strategy committee. Our main activity is in the UK and really Western Europe, continental Europe, some in the Gulf and South Africa. In APAC, the main activities here in Singapore, Japan, Australia, and Malaysia. I will say, give a lot of credit to Japan, took a different approach than other countries in this. They decided early on, a few years ago, there was a guy named Keisuke Kamada, kept coming to our conferences in the US and kept talking about information sharing in Japan. Now, everybody kept telling me, well, the Japanese, they don't have the culture to share. Well, they do. Turns out they formed their own ISAC. It's called the FS-ISAC Japan. They have 350 members on that group now. They're sharing like crazy. I know we have access to one of our staff has access to their portal, and we're sharing with them actively. We're kind of their global connection to the rest of the world. It's worked out great for us. We got a lot of new members out of the arrangement. Also, for them, I think it's been good because Japan is part of that information sharing culture that we've hope to facilitate, help see spread throughout the world. In terms of staff presence, our strategy is to, we have our main offices outside of Washington, D.C. That's where our management is, our security ops center, analysts, administration. United Kingdom, we have a regional director, intel officer, analyst. That's an all-female staff, by the way. I think that's the only cybersecurity all-female staff in the world. We also have an operation in Poland. That's run for us by IBM. In Europe, it's in development. We're working on a concept of developing an entire European, almost like a fusion center. Latin America, we just hired a regional director for that. Looking at developing some stuff, a regional analyst for the Middle East. In Singapore, now we have the regional director. We also have an executive director I'll talk about in a second. Analysts, a coordinator. We hired an intel officer a few weeks ago. Right now is based in Florida, in the US, working for Singapore. He wants to move to Singapore. That's his objective. So we're working on that to get him over here. And then Australia, we have a regional director. And Japan, we have actually 2 people in Japan. But these are our global operations, the 3 operating centers that we have. So it's really, you think about cyber. You can get attacked anywhere in the world at any time. So it's important to have a follow-the-sun type model. This is our APAC Intelligence Center. It's about 2 blocks away that way. It's not very far. We could walk over from here. This is our first member meeting we've had. Actually, I think that was a threat call that we had in the office a few weeks ago. That was kind of a landmark thing. A couple things about it. It's partially funded by an MAS innovation grant. We appreciate that. We have hired the executive director. It's Kunal Sehgal. We've hired an intelligence officer, 2 cyber analysts, and a member services coordinator. We do our annual summit in Singapore. The next one is in July 2018. And we had Intel training in July of 2017. That was about, I think it's 4.5 days of intense threat intelligence training. And we have monthly threat calls. That's soon to be biweekly once we get everybody up and running and fully trained. The key objective is to create this global cyber analyst team for 24/7 coverage. So we have people in the US, we have people in Poland supporting us from IBM, and then we have our own operation here in Singapore too. It's really, the objective is to expand the timely, relevant, actionable intelligence, vulnerability, and incident information. We're using local personnel to improve local cyber capabilities. Give you an example. We have the capability to have an emergency call. And what's an emergency in Europe might not be an emergency here. For instance, the WannaCry NotPetya attacks didn't really affect the Americas too much and this region as much as it did in Europe, particularly in the Ukraine in one case and some other areas. So Europeans had their own call. We had a worldwide call for the WannaCry. For NotPetya, we had a cry just for the European region, emergency call. And they can make their own decisions. We want to really emancipate all these regions to be able to make their own decisions. We also have an internship program to seed staff at FS-ISAC and member financial institutions. We also have a cyber security diversity to get more women involved in some of this in cybersecurity. We have a scholarship program that we started to offer. We had 4 women that got $5,000 each. We sent them to our conference. Our objective for next year is to have 20 women around the world be part of that program. Also providing training, conferences, develop staff, and engage member financial institutions throughout the region, and hopefully grow membership throughout the regions. So one organization's incident becomes the industry response. There really truly is strength in sharing. I remember during there were DDoS attacks in 2012 and 13 that really affected many financial institutions, mostly in the US, Canada, and a few others. Those DDoS attacks, we put them in their own group, those victims of those attacks, so they could share information. One of the members equated it to almost like a hive-type intelligence, a beehive, where you're protecting the hive from this attack. And he said, I have 5 incident response people. Now I have 500 people helping me, with risk mitigation recommendations. This is the attack I'm seeing. How do I mitigate this? And getting online real-time response on that. want to talk briefly in the next 5 minutes about partnerships. We have a lot of partners. These are just some of them listed that we either have agreements with or have helped us, or we have sharing agreements. We were just recently signed a cooperation agreement with Interpol, who I met with this morning again, but the agreement's already been signed. It's the exchange of data pertaining to cybercrime. It really provides a good framework for sharing information about trends and also assistance and know-how. We think this will be a huge benefit to our members, but really to the whole global community if we can further develop that relationship. The other thing we've done is we've embedded staff at the United Kingdom National Cybersecurity Center. Lucy Usher's been seconded there 3 days a week to this team. It's really enhanced our visibility of UK government intelligence, provides a direct link to the UK government for FS-ISAC membership, and strengthened our transatlantic sector resilience collaboration. We did a similar thing in the US with the Department of Homeland Security, have somebody embedded there at a top secret level at the NCIC, National Cybersecurity Coordination and Integration Center. That's the NCIC. And last, I just want to talk about the Global Resilience Federation. This is a multi-sector global sharing network. These are nonprofits that belong to it. Generally, it can be information sharing analysis centers or information sharing analysis organizations or CERTs worldwide. It's really promoting sharing, cross-sector sharing. These are the different types of partners that have already joined. And the growth of GRF, just to begin the idea, we started supporting the real estate ISAC, which was commercial facilities back in 2012, more physical related. And our board decided in 2014, a strategic planning effort, that we should assist other communities. We formed a separate division called Sector Services, and we supported the retail industry, or RCISC. It was like a retail ISAC, because retailers were experiencing a lot of breaches back then. We also did one for law firms back in 2015. That's up to 125 law firms have joined that around the world. The ONG ISAC is oil and gas. We run the oil and gas ISAC, or we help provide the operational support for them in running their ISAC. A cross-sector community task force was launched in 2016. Also started to support the energy sector this year. And then in May, we said, this is great, we're supporting all these other sectors, but it's not exactly the FS-ISAC mission, so let's split that off as its own entity. So we're a member of that group now. We're not running it anymore. They're running it on their own. If you're not part of the financial community, this is something you may want to join. We try to provide an analyst and a sharing portal for each community, provide security alerts, cross-sector alerts. These are some of the sectors that have already joined. And its own nonprofit mission ensures that it's really the members that determine the direction, not stockholders or others of the group. And it's really a multi-directional sharing between members and analyst teams. So my final message is Global Resilience Federation, stronger together. And I picked the biggest, baddest animal in the savannah here to illustrate this. This is the water buffalo. It's not the lion. They're the bad guys, right? The lions. So it's the water buffalo banding together against attacks from the bad guys out there. With that, I would love to take questions, but I think with a minute left, it's going to be tough. So if you have any questions for me, please feel free to approach me afterwards. I'll be hanging out over there somewhere and be happy to take them. Thank you very much. Or maybe I'll see you later in the conference. I think I'm on a panel tomorrow, too. Thank you.